noticed that I'm the model. Those t-shirts on sale as we move towards Reconciling Ministry Sunday, which is in about a month. So if you'd like to buy one, there will be other people similarly dressed out there trying to get you in contact with the t-shirt. All right? Second of all, in about a month, on September the 17th, Ben Hugh will be coming here to play. He is a guitarist from the University of Arizona, and I met him, didn't get to hear him play, but if he's anything like our last concert, you will love him. And so that will be on Sunday, September 17th. We'd like to invite you to be part of that. You might have noticed that today we have an interesting title for the commentary called "The Gods Must Be Crazy." How many have shouted out those words at least once in your life about something or another? How many have felt those words escape out of your mouth quite a bit in the last 6 months or so? There's a lot of stuff going on that makes it so that the gods must be crazy. It doesn't feel like somebody's up there moving things around the way I want them to be moved around. And that's because the world works differently than that. Isn't that true? The world often moves us into foreign lands, into places we don't understand, into things that are struggle for us. And that's definitely true about some of what's going on in our world right now, is we're sitting in spaces that are challenging for us. Challenging to figure out what next, who with next. And we get stuck with people and in places where we are pushed way beyond our limits, our abilities, seemingly. Ian Nakayama, who's a student at the University of Virginia, said this: "I feel like I should be doing something, but I don't know what that something is." And so for a short time, he fled from that campus to be in a safer space. He is a bushman. You see his picture right up there. And he also leaves his safe space, that which he understands, to go to a space where he discovers that he is not in Kansas anymore. And so just watch what happens to him here.
There were some ridiculous-looking animals, but they looked good to eat, and he was hungry. Suddenly, a young boy made chattering noises at Lee. So he greeted him and said, "I shot one of those animals. It'll go to sleep soon, and then we can eat it." But the boy ran away, maybe to call his family to join the feast. There was a weird sound, and another of those strange animals with the round legs appeared. The young boy and a grown-up got out of it, and they seemed very excited. He said, "Come sit down, there's enough meat for all of us." But the man was rude and greedy. He took the whole animal. He said, "You have very bad manners. If you want to eat the whole thing, I'll have to shoot another one for myself." The man shouted at him, but he didn't want to have anything to do with such an uncouth person, so he ignored him. Suddenly there was a thunderclap. The animals ran away, and he ran after them. He was very hungry.
Come on! Come on! Who speaks English?
Have you noticed that in those, not in Kansas anymore, our misunderstandings about the situation get us in a little bit of trouble? Just like Key got into a bit of trouble because he didn't understand. And the world was working differently than what he thought it ought to work. And often those moments help us to compound problems rather than solve them. And most of us are trying, in most cases, to figure out solutions to issues around us. But those foreign land moments, those not in Kansas moments, make it so that we very easily do things that do the opposite and get us into trouble. On the hill above Cusco is this huge, huge set of walls. It's called Sacsayhuaman. And they are about 20-foot walls. And those types of walls are scattered all throughout the Inca region, usually to produce a bit of arable land in order to plant some corn or some quinoa in order to have something to eat in those regions. The conquistadores, when they came in though, looked at those walls, and they came from a place where great big walls meant fortified city. And guess what they did? They speaking the language of conquistadores, attacked. And the Inca Empire at that time was a relatively very peaceful empire. And Sacsayhuaman, those huge walls that I stood beside, really was just a ceremonial space. And they were welcome there. But they spoke the language of medieval Europe, rather than whatever language that was being spoken in that Inca Empire. But we do the same thing very often. We speak and we move according to whatever the old story was inside our head, according to what we were taught to do, according to what somebody has placed inside our heart and in our head and in our spirit, instead of looking for what today is speaking. Instead of looking and seeing what it is that today is drawing out of us. And anytime we do that, we compound the problem. Charlottesville was an instance of that, where we were hearing and speaking very different languages. And well, let's come back to the University of Virginia later on, because there's lots to be said there. That dichotomy between what we think and what this new space is drawing out of us often throws our hearts and our spirits into a turmoil, because we know what we think we ought to do, but it doesn't seem to work right now. It's easy to see the problem in them, isn't it? But speaking to them, being with them, figuring out how to move beyond this problem, that's the issue, isn't it? How do we move into the new space? So we tell ourselves all kinds of things, like this week I heard somebody who said this, that one of the advice we give to each other on a regular basis is act like an adult. And he said, that's horrible advice, just look at Charlottesville. Right? But we give each other that type of advice on a regular basis that maybe has some truth, but maybe doesn't have as much truth as what we wish. And it's so easy to live out of whatever that old paradigm, that old saying, that old thing was. And it's so much easier than to hear the new story. I believe that we, today, in America, are living out of a mental illness. I believe that in America, we are so busy, each of us holding on to a small section of truth, just that small section of truth lies to us and blinds us to the larger truth around us. This week I went down to New Hope United Methodist Church. It sits kind of in the Valencia and Freeway section of town, right down in there. And I went down there to see my friend Augustine and to talk with him and a good friend of yours, Sarai, Francisco's wife, about joining the Justice for Our Neighbor movement. And that's a legal clinic that we're trying to set up in that section of town so that there will be more resources for people like Sarai, who is a DACA person, so that she will be able to help not just herself but others to figure out what to do next in these moments. And as I was going down there, in fact, let me just tell you that Sarai tells you hi. Just like that. But as I was going down there, I went by two great big signs that showed me that I'm reacting out of this mental illness space. One of them sat on the side of a church, and it was a big sign. It was about a 2-story wall, and it went from the top to the bottom and side to side on this wall, probably 20, 30 feet long. And it said 4 words that I've heard my whole life. In God we trust. And as I read that, because I also saw the name of the church, and it was one of those kinds of churches, I heard it saying, but you don't. We do, but not you. And I began to argue with that sign. And I shouldn't, but I did. And then I went on down the road, and there was this other sign, great big billboard, and it said, real Christians forgive like Jesus. Loved that until I saw the number to call. It said 1-800-4-TRUTH. And I began to argue with that number. See, the mental illness that is affecting us all makes it so that I doubt, I fear, I argue in every situation. And I see lots of enemies, often where enemies lie. Not all the time, but we are often struggling out of that type of space. And that's hurting us a lot. The Bushman, he and his family, live in a gentle space, the Kalahari. Gentle in that there is not hardwood, there is not metal, there is not things like that until one day something arrives that changes their world.
But in the Kalahari, it's always Tuesday, or Thursday if you like, or Sunday. No clocks or calendars tell you to do this or that. Lately, strange new things sometimes appear in the sky. Noisy birds that flew without flapping their wings. One day, something fell from the sky. He had never seen anything like this in his life. It looked like water, but it was harder than anything else in the world. He wondered why the gods had sent this thing down to the earth. It was the strangest and most beautiful thing they had ever seen, and they wondered why the gods had sent it. Albo got his finger stuck in the thing, and the children thought he was very funny. At first, he tried the thing out to cure thumbs. It had the right shape and just the right weight. It was also beautifully smooth and ideal for curing snakeskin. And Carlo discovered he could make music on it. And every day they discovered a new use for the thing. It was harder and heavier and smoother than anything they'd ever known. It was the most useful thing the gods had ever given them, a real labor-saving device. But the gods had been careless. They had sent only one. And now, for the first time in their lives, here was a thing which could not be shared because there was only one of it. Suddenly, everybody needed it most of the time. A thing they had never needed before became a necessity. And unfamiliar emotions began to stir. A feeling of wanting to own, of not wanting to share. And other new things came. Anger, jealousy, hate, and violence. He was angry with the gods. He shouted, "Take back your things, we don't want it. Look at the trouble it caused."
Tom Shadyac said, I do believe there's a malaise, a disconnection that comes when wealth enables us to stand on top, rather than being down in the meat and marrow of community in life. Cornel West, who was one of the pastors of the counter-protest in Charlottesville, called this radical conditionedness, that we're used to the condition where we are, where we understand what has defined the past for us, and we don't move into what this new thing is calling to us. And you saw that with Key and his family, didn't you? They weren't ready for this new hard thing. Not like what we're used to, and so we react incorrectly. And we often push the blame somewhere else about what happens. We often treat mental illness like this that we're dealing with in America, like we treat cancer, saying if I just cut out a certain person, if I just get rid of the tumor, everything will be fine. But mental illness affects us all. It is a community disease, part of the whole body, not just a piece of the body. And all of us need healing in this moment. But we have to do that, we have to emerge from our own story. Last week, right after this service, someone came up to me and said, "Why didn't you talk about Charlottesville?" And it's because I hadn't heard of it. Why? Because I was busy preparing my story for last week. Right? Now, all day Saturday, I was busy doing that, and I was caught up in that world, and I missed something important to hear. But don't you do that also? Or something about you, something about your world so catches you up that you only see that narrow slice of things rather than something larger. And that's what happened in Charlottesville. The alt-right was absolutely wrong in Charlottesville. They were so focused on a thing that they missed the larger picture. People screaming out their own story at the expense of others is never right. Somebody believing what they think is right so much that they drive a car into a crowd is no different than the terrorism that we saw in Spain. And I don't even have time to really deal with Spain. But that's what we saw. Brian McLaren, who wrote an amazing piece about, he was one of the clergy that were there on the ground in Charlottesville, and he said, "This is what I saw in Charlottesville," and you should read his article. And part of what he said is he had never seen Nazi flags flying and carried proudly in the United States before. And so we all sit like Ian Nakayama saying, what do I do now? How do I respond? But Katie Couric was also on the ground there. She was doing a story for National Geographic, and she wrote an article afterwards that you should read. And it's called Being in Charlottesville Broke My Heart. It also filled me with hope. And she tells the stories of all those things that happen. And here's one of the most remarkable things. On the site where that story is at is a video that she made. And it starts off with the man who organized the rally. His name is Jason Kessler. And he begins to tell his story. And as you begin to hear that story, some of it will make sense to you. And then it goes where it goes, right? And you see the differences of your opinion and that opinion, and you want to fight with it. But here's the remarkable thing about what Katie Couric did. Because you could hear in her questioning the way she questioned and struggled with, but she kept listening. She kept trying to hear and, in whatever way she could, understand what it is that he was trying to say. And that is hard work to do, because he had a bunch of, he thinks that this nation should have a white population that is 80 to 85% of the total population. And that's holding on to some paradigm that just will never, ever be true again. But yet, if she'd have stopped and said, I'm not listening anymore, she would have made it so he had even more reasons to move away. So she listened, trying to hear something of how to move forward. The Bushmen are considered to be very bad workers by employers in Botswana. At one point, they decided to pay them higher wages and encourage them to work harder and for longer hours. Instead, because of that higher wage, the Bushmen began to work fewer hours. Because the higher wage made it so they got there enough sooner. And hoarding wealth is not built into their culture. But if you try to speak one set of words into a person's life without knowing how they will be heard, without knowing what that life is, what has gone through, without knowing what informs that life, you will do the same thing as those employers did with the Bushmen. You will think you're helping when really you're going to get a very different result. You have to know what they emerge out of. Whether or not you agree with it, if you don't know what it is that is informing what they're doing right now, you will speak the wrong message back. This movie is a comedy. But it's a comedy because they start off by taking us to a different space than where we would be. They take us right into the bush. And they show us who the Bushmen are. So that through the rest of the movie, we watch it knowing what Key is about. And we understand better how his past life informs his moving into this new world.
It looks like a paradise, but it is in fact the most treacherous desert in the world. The Kalahari. After the short rainy season, there are many water holes, and even rivers. But after a few weeks, the water sinks away into the deep Kalahari sand. The water holes dry up, and the rivers start flowing. The grass fades to a beautiful plant color that offers excellent grazing for the animals. But for the next 9 months, there'll be no water to drink. So most of the animals move away, leaving the beautiful plant grass uneaten. Humans avoid the deep Kalahari like the plague because man must have water to live. So the beautiful landscapes are devoid of people. Except for the little people of the Kalahari. Pretty, dainty, small and graceful, the Bushmen. Where any other person would die of thirst in a few days, they live quite contentedly in this desert that doesn't look like a desert. They knew where to dig for roots and bulbs and tubers, and which berries and pods are good to eat. And of course, they know what to do about water. For instance, in the early morning, you can collect dewdrops from leaves that were carefully laid out the previous evening. Or a plume of grass can be a reservoir. And if you have the know-how, an insignificant clump of twigs can tell you where to dig. Then you come to life with an enormous tuber. You scrape shavings off it with a stick that has split to give it a sharp edge. You take a handful of the shavings, point your thumb at your mouth, and squeeze. They must be the most contented people in the world. They have no crime, no punishment, no violence, no laws, no police, judges, rulers, or bosses. They believe that the gods put only good and useful things on the earth for them to use. In this world of theirs, nothing is bad or evil. Even a poisonous snake is not bad. You just have to keep away from the sharp end. Actually, a snake is very good. In fact, it's delicious. And the skin makes a fine punch. They live in the vastness of the Kalahari in small family groups. One family of Bushmen might meet up with another family once in a few years, but for the most part they live in complete isolation, quite unaware that there are other people in the world.
Joseph was sent down to Europe, to Egypt. I started with in Egypt. Sent down to Egypt in a vengeful way. But there he made the best of his situation and became a powerful leader of the land. And then those brothers who sent him there, the ones who he had every reason to hate and push away, came back looking for food, not knowing that it was their brother in front of them. But you know what he did? He recognized them. Mark Nepo, in our call to awareness, in what's going to be our contemporary reading, says this, that if we listen closely enough, we are soothed into remembering our common name. Joseph had a new way of being, a new way of living. He was, in many ways, an Egyptian, not the brother that they had sold into Egypt. But he remembered. And he saw in those brothers a commonality. And whatever we do sometimes that is the different language between us makes it so that we look at the other and don't see our common family name. But we say one thing here that is so important, that in that other person is the Spirit of God. The Spirit in me speaks to the Spirit in them. Unless, of course, I choose not to listen. I choose to push away. And they are often pushing away, aren't they? But we have to be the opposite. We have to be those who somehow choose love and step towards those other people. In their wrongness, in their bad stories, we've got to be able to hear what causes them to be right there, because they will not do anything about changing if we don't do anything about hearing them. If we don't choose love, we never, ever help them to choose love. In another reading, Mark Nepo goes on and says, any moment of interest or pain or adversary can surprise us into the larger totality of life, breaking our current limits and giving us the chance to redefine. But we can't do anything about what they do. We can only choose how we respond. And in that article, he says that we can be open so that suddenly, so often, we discover the way the soul unfolds on earth. You see, in this moment of tragedy, in this moment of such horror in Charlottesville, somehow the soul can unfold if we help it to happen. Hate will surface again, said Katie Couric, but so will its enemies. And when hate unfolds around you, what you need to do is choose love. Somehow in the midst of how they act, somehow in the midst of whatever they do that is so horrendous, you have to figure out how to respond to them in love. Brian McLaren said that we have to, in every moment, choose to be the beloved community. Muse says it this way: when hope and love has been lost and you fall to the ground, you must find a way. When the darkness descends and you're told it's the end, you must find a way. When God decides to look the other way and a clown takes the throne, you must find a way. Face the firing squad. Against all the odds, you will find a way. Dig deep. They say, dig down, dig down, dig down, and find faith. Key carries that Coke bottle, thinking he'll never, ever find the end of the world. The last line of the movie says this: Key was beginning to think he would never find the end of the world. And suddenly, one day, there it was. Be the beloved community. Choose love in the midst of this hate. Make this moment a moment where somehow it begins to turn and people begin to rediscover God's voice in our world. Choose to change what happens. Amen?
Amen.